Hi. Um, so I thought I'd do a little bit of Roald Dahl chat first, and I thought I would talk about Roald Dahl and his inventions. Basically, he was very clever, and if he ever needed a little gadget or something to help him out in the garden, or something to, a little sort of, I don't know, I've said it like gadget. If you need a little gadget, he would make one. He'd invent one. He'd come up with something himself. He just kind of wouldn't let things stop him. He'd think, "Yep, I can do that. I'm going to go ahead and do that." He created gardening gadgets. He made his own hot air balloons and kites. He developed medical cures and brain bending games. Do you remember a while ago I told you about him tying cushions on his sister's tummies so he could use them for um, target practice? And his ambition was to invent a silent cigarette lighter so he could sneak off and have nighttime cigarettes without his wife knowing. But luckily for his lungs, he never managed to invent one of those. And then when his son Theo was hurt in an accident, Roald Dahl researched ways to help his son. Now his son had a problem with his head got hit and he had lots of fluid on the brain, and he invented a special valve that allowed water to drain from the brain. I mean, that's pretty amazing, isn't it? And he and his neighbour also pioneered a type of therapy that helped his first wife make a full recovery after she was very ill. I think she had a series of strokes. And his first wife, who was very ill, was a very famous Hollywood actress called Patricia McNeil, and you can look her up maybe. Have a little look, you can find her. Um, and that therapy is still used today in hospitals. I think that's pretty impressive. And his most famous favourite invention, he didn't invent it himself, but one of his most favourite inventions was one of these Thermos flask. He just thought these were the most genius things ever, because he used to take a flask of tea every day up to his hut, didn't he? So that's why he really loved these. Um, I must say, I quite like flask as well. So maybe you can tell me what your favourite invention is today. I'm trying to think of a really good invention at the minute. I should have thought of one before I started chatting to you. Maybe I'll think of one. I think these are quite a good invention. The Kindle things, these are really good. Um, and I really quite like motorbikes as well, and bicycles. The wheels are a really good invention. Okay, so have a little think of a really good invention. Maybe whilst you've got all this time on your hands, have a go at inventing something. That'd be ingenious, wouldn't it? So far we have 3 votes for Fantastic Mr. Fox, 2 votes for Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, and some like random votes for like just one for the Twits. And we're going to do some adult stories as well. Somebody's requested Skin, so we'll do some of those as well. But get your vote in if you're particular about what story you want next. Okay, so 19, Rockabye Baby. At 8:30 the next morning, my father went into the workshop and dialed Dr. Spencer's number on the telephone. "Now listen, Doctor," he said, "if you could be here at the filling station in about half an hour, I think I might have a little surprise present for you." The doctor said something in reply, and my father replaced the receiver. At 9 o'clock, Dr. Spencer arrived in his car. My father went over to him, and the two of them held a whispered conversation behind the pumps. Suddenly, tiny doctor clapped his hands together and sprang high up in the air, hooting with laughter. "You don't mean it," he cried. "It's not possible." He then rushed over to me and grasped my hand in his. "I do congratulate you, dear boy." What a triumph! What a miracle! What a victory! Now, why on earth didn't I think of that method myself? You are a genius, sir. Hail to thee, dear Danny. You are the champion of the world. Here she comes, my father called out, pointing down the road. Here she comes. Here who comes? The doctor said. Mrs. Clipstone, he spoke the name proudly as though he were a commander referring to his bravest officer. The three of us stood together beside the pumps, looking down at the road. Can't you see her? My father asked. Far away in the distance, I could just make out a small figure advancing towards us. What's she pushing, Dad? My father gave a sly look. There's only one way of delivering pheasants safely, he said, and that's under a baby. Isn't that right, Doctor? Under a baby? Doc Spencer said. Of course, in a pram with a baby on top. Fantastic, said the doctor. Oh, my dad thought that one up many years ago, my father said, and it's never known to fail yet. It's brilliant, Doc Spector said. Only a brilliant mind could think of a thing like that. He was a brilliant man, my father said. Can you see her now, Doctor? And that'll be young Christopher Clipstone, sitting in the pram. He's 1.5, a lovely child. I birthed him, Doc Spencer said. He weighed 8 pounds and 3 ounces. I could just make out a small dot of a baby sitting high up in the pram, which had its hood folded down. There's more than 100 pheasants under that little nipper, my father said happily. Just imagine it. You can't put 100 pheasants under a child in a pram, Dr. Spencer said. Don't be ridiculous. You can if it's been specially made for the job, my father said. This one is built extra long and extra wide, and it's got an extra deep well underneath. Listen, you could push a cow around in there if you wanted to, let alone 100 pheasants and a baby. Did you make it yourself, Dad? I asked. More or less, Danny. You remember when I walked you to school and then went off to buy the raisins? The day before yesterday, I said. Yes, and after that I went straight to the vicarage and converted their pram into this extra special large poacher's model. It's a beauty, really it is. You wait till you see it, and Mrs. Clipstone says it pushes even easier than her ordinary one. She did a practice circuit with it in her backyard as soon as I'd finished it. Fantastic, the doctor said again. Absolutely fantastic. Normally, my father went on, an ordinary bought pram is all you'd ever need. But then no one's ever had over 100 pheasants to deliver before. Where does the baby sit? Doctor asked. On top, of course, my father said. All you need is a sheet to cover them, and the baby sits on the sheet. A bunch of pheasants makes a nice, soft mattress for a child. I don't doubt it, the doctor said. He'll be having a very comfortable ride today, that young Christopher, my father said. We stood beside the pumps, waiting for Mrs. Clipstone to arrive. It was the 1st of October, and one of those warm, windless autumn mornings, with a darkening sky and a smell of thunder in the air. What was so marvellous about my father, I thought, was the way he always surprised you. It was impossible to be with him for long without being surprised and astounded by one thing or another. He was like a conjurer, bringing out things out of a hat. Right now, it was a pram and the baby. In a few minutes, it would be something else. I felt sure of that. Right through the village, as bold as brass, my father said. Good for her. She seems in an awful hurry, Dad, she said. She's she's half running. Don't you think she's sort of half running, Dr. Spencer? I imagine she's a bit anxious to unload the cargo, the doctor said. My father squinted down the road at the approaching figure. She does appear to be going a bit quick, doesn't she? He began carefully. She's going very quick, I said. There was a pause. My father beginning to stare hard at the lady in the distance. Perhaps she doesn't want to be caught in the rain, he said. I'll bet that's exactly what it is. She thinks it's going to rain and she doesn't want the baby to get wet. She could put the hood up, I said. He didn't answer this. She's running, Dr. Spencer cried. Look! It was true. Mrs. Clipstone had suddenly broken into a full sprint. My father stood very still, staring at her, and in the silence that followed, I fancy I could hear the baby screaming. What's up, Dad? He didn't reply. There's something wrong with that baby, Dr. Spencer said. Listen. At this point, Mrs. Clipstone was about 200 yards away from us, but closing in fast. Can you hear him now, Dad? Yes, I can hear him. He's yelling his head off, Dr. Spencer said. The small, shrill voice in the distance was growing louder every second. Frantic, piercing, non-stop. He's having a fit, my father said. It's a good thing we've got a doctor handy. Dr. Spencer didn't say anything. That's why she's running, Doctor, my father said. He's having a fit and she wants to get him here quick and put him under a cold tap. Some noise, I said. If it isn't a fit, my father said, you can bet your life it's something like that. I doubt it's a fit, Dr. Spencer said. My father shifted his feet uneasily in the gravel of the driveway. There's 1,001 different things keep happening every day to little babies like that, he said. That's right, isn't it, Doctor? Of course, said Dr. Spencer, every day. I knew a baby once who caught his fingers in the spokes of a pram wheel, my father said. It cut them clean off. Ow, that sounds really horrible. The doctor smiled. Whatever it is, my father said, I wish to heavens she'd stop running. It'll give the game away. A long lorry loaded with bricks came up behind the pram, and the driver slowed down and poked his head out of the window to stare. Mrs. Clipstone ignored him and flew on. She was so close now I could see her big red face with the mouth wide open, panting for breath. I noticed she was wearing white gloves on her hands, very prim and dainty. And there was a funny little white hat to match perched right on top of her head, like a mushroom. Suddenly, out of the pram, straight into the air, flew an enormous pheasant. My father let out a cry of horror. The fool in the lorry began roaring with laughter. The pheasant flapped around drunkenly for a few seconds, then lost height and landed on the grass by the side of the road. Crikey, Doc Spencer said. Look at that. The grocer's van came up behind the lorry and began hooting to get by. Mrs. Clipstone kept on running. Then whoosh, a second pheasant flew up out of the pram. And then a third, then a fourth. Great Scott, Dr. Spencer said. I know what's happened. It's the sleeping pills. They're wearing off. My father didn't say a word. Mrs. Clipstone covered the last 50 yards at a tremendous pace. She came swinging into the filling station with birds flying out of the pram in all directions. What on earth is happening? She shrieked. She pulled up sharp against the first pump and seized the screaming infant into her arms and dragged him clear. With the weight of the child suddenly lifted away, a great cloud of pheasants rose up out of the gigantic pram. There must have been well over 100 of them, and the whole sky above was filled with huge brown birds clapping their wings. The sleeping pills don't last forever, Dr. Spencer said, shaking his head sadly. It always wears off the next morning. The pheasants were too dopey to fly far. In a few seconds down they came and settled themselves like a swarm of locusts all over the filling station. The place was covered with them. They sat wing to wing along the roof of the workshop, and about a dozen were clinging to the sill of the office window. Some had flown down on the rack that held the bottles of lubricating oil, and others were sliding on the bonnet of Doc Spencer's car. One cockbird with a fine tail was perched superbly on top of a petrol pump, and quite a number. Those that were too drunk to do anything else simply squatted in the driveway at our feet, fluffing their feathers and blinking their small eyes. My father stayed, remarkably calm. But Not poor Mrs. Clipstone. They nearly pecked him to pieces, she cried, clasping the screaming baby to her bosom. Take him into the caravan, Mrs. Clipstone, my father said. All these birds are making him nervous. And Danny, push that pram into the workshop quick. Mrs. Clipstone disappeared into the caravan with the baby. Pushed the pram into the workshop. Across the road, a line of cars had already started forming behind the brick lorry and the grocery van. People were opening their doors and getting out and beginning to cross over to stare at the pheasants. Watch out, Dad! Look who's here! Can you guess who was here? Good chapter, very exciting. I'm not sure I'd fancy sleeping on over 100 pheasants. I'm not surprised that little boy was kicking off. So, have a good rest of the night. Chapter 20 tomorrow. I think there's like 3 chapters left. So get your votes in. Have a good night. Lots of love. Take care. Bye.